Connaught, how are you? I'm sitting down with my brother Aaron. My name is Sarika. We are the co-founders of Candlelittales. And Happy New Year. It's a new year. It doesn't feel like a new year in some ways, but it's a new year. We're recording this from Cork. We often do live streams, but we're taking a little bit of a break from that in January, and we are going to pre-record these. So, first of all, thank you to our Patreon supporters who bought us these new mics and equipment and pay for the equipment that we use to make these podcasts. And we've a couple of announcements before we get into the chat.
We do indeed. So my name is Aaron Hegarty. I'm the other co-founder of Candlelittales, and I guess we are in another lockdown. We've a new year, we've a new mailing list. Well, we've a new email kind of on the mailing list, thanks to Rue O'Shea. And if you're not on our mailing list, well, you can DM us or email us at candlelittalespodcast, and you can get onto that. What we're talking about at the moment, and what we're getting excited about, is our storytelling course, the Arc of Storytelling. So, Sarika, tell us a bit about the storytelling course.
Well, we've been talking about doing a storytelling course for a long time.
Yeah.
Like most of our ideas, this was kind of conceived of and thought of probably 6 months to a year before we actually, anybody else heard about it. Because a lot of people have been doing courses over Zoom in the course of the various lockdowns that have been happening. And we had been actually talking about doing a course, a physical in-person course, kind of this time last year actually.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that we kept running up against and the logistical hurdle that we kept having was how are we going to get people together and booking a space to run it in and all that kind of stuff. So we've had this kind of in mind for a long time. And part of it is, the way that we got better at storytelling was by kind of giving each other feedback and critique and sort of learning on the job. And we've distilled a few things that are very helpful from that. And we've also run training courses for My Streets, who are a social enterprise who retrain people who've experienced homelessness as tour guides. And we've kind of found a workshop approach that we really like and that gets really good results.
But you also have taught me a whole other series of things I didn't quite know I would be learning about because of your experience in teaching.
Well, this has also been an interesting aspect of it, is that I, in my previous life as a branding consultant, part of what I did with Alexandra Dunlop and ADL was teach a course in the analysis of culture through story. Right. And what that ended up giving me was a kind of a vocabulary for talking about some of the ways that we construct stories. Things like semiotics and things like archetypal journeys and things like basic plots. And actually, now, while I was going at that from a point of view, and I was teaching that course in Griffith College for the 3 years that we taught it, from a point of view of analysis, a lot of that stuff is actually also very helpful for storytelling and construction of narrative.
Massively, yeah.
Some of it isn't. A lot of it is. So we've kind of looked at some of that and sort of pulled out the bits that are relevant for building a story and creating a story.
And our favourite parts of it, and I have managed to put it together, in an online course recently taught through CDTV in Dublin, who wanted an online something, because I teach drama and I do workshops, and I've been doing kind of half storytelling, half drama workshops for years now, including improv, including kind of the games that you use in drama, and then pulling on the fact that you don't need a script for storytelling. You don't necessarily need one, and yet you know the building blocks, and learning to master, I guess, how to distill an awful lot of information into a narrative sequence of events, and then perform and focus on the performative elements as well as the diction and the basics of being heard, and then understanding other aspects around story, plot, analysis, deeper meanings of story.
There's a lot of stuff, and then of course, because we decided to do a candlelittale storytelling, we decided to wrap all of that in Irish mythology,
of course,
which is what we've been working on for the last while. So it's kind of it's a course. It is more a course in the how to tell stories, but the way that we're going to be exploring those lessons and the kind of material that we're going to be working with in this course is the material of Irish mythology. Not all of it, because that would require far more than a 6-week course, but that's what we're gonna be using
as
to work with
our content,
as our kind of building blocks, the building blocks that we're going to take, rather than making it, fairy tale, which we've sometimes done, or folk tale, which we've often done. We're going to make it, we're going to take Irish mythology as our kind of foundation that we're going to be playing around in. That's the sandbox. Like that's what we're going to be.
No, I'm really looking forward to it. The course is starting on the 9th, and if you want to get in touch and ask if there's any places left, do indeed, places are filling up, and luckily our Patreon supporters get a bit of a discount because they're very helpful and they've been keeping us going, motivated, and honest to God, without that level of motivation and inspiration to keep us going, we wouldn't be spreading out these stories. But let's get on from
Well, I want to say one more thing about this.
Oh, sorry.
Which I think is important, and I've really only just thought about this, so if you disagree, we can cut it.
We won't be cutting it.
But
who likes editing these things?
On the same basis that we've always run Candlelittales, we've always run it as a kind of a, you can come in and you can listen and you can pay if you can.
Yeah.
And while we can't do that for a storytelling course necessarily, I would also like to say that if you would really think this is something that would be very valuable to you, and if you think that it is too expensive, or if you can't swing it right now, please get in touch with us and tell us that.
Yeah.
And please get in touch with us anyway and say, I'd love to, if you'd love to do it, but you can't swing it right now, let us know, and let's see if we can do something.
Yeah, of course.
Because I would never want someone to look at that and go, okay, this is, because we're artists, we've dealt with huge financial insecurity, as you always do when you're working in the arts, and so I would never want to bar somebody from doing something that I'm doing.
Very good point.
On that basis. So we've set a price, and we've set a course that we think is good and worth it. But if that is your only barrier, please talk to us before deciding that you can't do it for that 100%. Reason, because there's probably something we can figure out.
And this storytelling course, the trainings that we do, we've built a company, a group of musicians and storytellers that we can gig with, that we can perform with, as a means of being able to pass the hat, being able to get into festivals, being able to do workshops, being able to perform in family events as well as adult events, as a way of earning a living, as a way of monetizing our creativity. Because as a performer, as a writer, as a group of performers, it is very difficult to monetize creativity. It always is and always has been. Our mother is an artist, and she was an art teacher in Cork Prison until relatively recently, and she had to teach. And teaching is one of the greatest ways of monetizing creativity and spreading that inspiration and learning and getting some value and meaning out of the thing that you're putting out.
But it's always that kind of dialectic as well of particularly for other artists, I don't want to be like, well, you can't do it because you can't afford it. So many times we've been in that position where we're like, God, I'd love to do that, but it costs fucking $10,000.
And a woman that was in my my drama masters in theatre, my masters in drama and theatre in Galway, got there eventually. Of course, she did the storytelling course on through CDTB, and it was me kind of half learning to do it over Zoom, but it was fantastic to do. It was great for her to do, great for me to be able to do. It was great fun. We all came to the end of it and we're like, shit, this is the end now. And the incremental learning that went on each week was fantastic to see. So I'm really looking forward to doing that course with Sorka this time, and whoever else
and through mythology, and we're looking forward to meeting those of you who have already got your place on the course. We are really looking forward to meeting you guys and working with you guys.
Yes, indeed.
And anybody else who's interested, like I said, get in touch, let us know. And that's, I think now we should probably move on to talking about the story that we're going to talk about.
Fair. I think we should. And I'm very excited to be talking about Queen Maeve, because the death of Maeve, as I put up on one of our Instagram stories, this podcast was released, and someone got in touch with one message saying, "Jeez." So she knew the inside and out of it. And I haven't listened to the podcast already. Go back and listen to last week's. It's recently released. Queen Maeve, the famous, brilliant hero of Connaught, has an awful lot of she pulls at a few different opinions, and she's a contentious character.
Oh yeah.
But let's start with where you kind of started off this story, which is with Clothru, her sister.
Yeah, because
Right.
Maeve. Well, to give the short summary of the death of Maeve, it goes back to Maeve's family of origin, and particularly this one sister, Clothru, who is an extraordinary figure. Apparently, she was also Queen of Connaught. She spent some time in the other world, and she decided that what she wanted to do was she wanted to be the founder of a lineage of kings. And I think this is one of those stories that, like, probably the connotations in the time that it was first composed are quite different to what they are today. Because what Clothru decided to do was she decided to have an incestuous relationship with first her brothers. She had triplet brothers.
So much incest in Irish mythology.
And then she had, so a lot of the time it's accidental, but in Clothru's case it absolutely wasn't.
Not accidental at all.
And she did this intentionally to kind of concentrate the blood of the kings, because she was a daughter of kings and woman kings, and so were her brothers, and so she kind of decided to distill that down and had a son called Criven Nianar, who's actually quoted in MacDougall's Pig as saying, "Never trust a woman," which I think is really interesting, because he was the son of Clothru, and he was Criven Nianar because he had 3 stripes. He had 2 stripes. He had a stripe across his neck and a stripe across his waist, which showed that he was the son of 3 fathers, because he looked like each of them in his different parts.
Head, body,
yeah,
legs.
He had the head of one, the body of the other, and the legs of the third. And then, where it gets real sticky, is that Clothru then slept with him when he was grown up, and had a son by him as well. Now she occupies a really interesting place in Irish culture, because the Christians absolutely vilified her, which is totally fair, because incest, particularly parent-child incest, is real fucking bad and real dark. And I don't want anybody to misunderstand me on this. Any incest, like incest generally, it's a pretty universal taboo. So she was very much vilified by the church, but at the same time, most medieval Irish kings trace their lineage from her, and the lineage of Criven Nianar.
Oh.
And so she had this weird
status thing.
Like, it was kind of like what she did was super fucked up. Everybody knows that, but at the same time, she's my great whatever. And
Right.
that's why I have the stones to be the king here, because that's my lineage, and that's how pure it is.
She was the mother of the line of kings,
Like,
which was the legends.
She achieved her goal. The other thing about Clothru, and the reason that she comes into Maeve's death story, is that one of her last husband was Cruthor MacNessa, and she had a son named Ferbuda by Cruthor MacNessa. The story goes that Maeve killed her while she was pregnant and cut the child out of her. Now we know that Maeve and Cruthor absolutely fucking hated each other.
And a bad marriage went wrong, and
had a bad marriage, and subsequently he raped her, and we know all of that stuff. The story goes that she killed Clothru and cut the child out of her. So Ferbuda, the baby, survived, and actually the baby was born with horns on his head. So whether he could have been born without a cesarean section is a little bit unclear.
Jesus, he got out anyway.
But he got out and he survived, and Clothru didn't. But when I was researching this story, I found a piece of information that said that there are some accounts that say that it was actually Criven Nianar who killed Clothru, and not Maeve. So I decided to incorporate that into the story, and I decided to kind of like make that a little bit like, she never went around saying that she did it. She was pretty happy to say that she killed Cruthor MacNessa's children.
Yeah. I mean, like, she was an amazing character. So was Clothru, and I was fascinated by the fact that Clothru was also a woman king of Connaught.
Yeah.
Again, for those who are not speakers of Irish who don't understand the woman king, the Ban Rí is king. Ban Rian is woman king, and
that's kind of the translation that's usually given for queen. So yes. we kind of took it as like, God, it feels different, doesn't it? Woman king.
It does. I fucking like it.
I like it too. I think it's a different energy. It's something about, there's something about a way of, we've talked before about kind of masculine and feminine energies. And I think you could have, I think woman king and man queen are things that can exist.
Totally, yeah.
And I think they are very different.
But performers dress up in drag and call themselves queens,
Totally.
That for me is a
I hadn't
similarity.
thought of it that way, but actually, yeah,
But
absolutely.
it's completely. It feels like a female going into the male kind of domain of like, I'm a woman king. Do exactly as I say, and I'm going to operate in a very manly, masculine form.
And I think that's something really interesting about Maeve, and I think that's one of the reasons that she's so controversial and she's so hated.
Opposed to the word queen is like
queen is
sitting behind the king.
Well, not even necessarily behind the king. I think a queen role, I think a queen rulership is much more about facilitating connections between people. Whereas I think a king rulership is like, everybody connect to me and do what I say, and you don't need to worry about each other. But a queen rulership is very like, there's a brilliant scene that I remember doing an analysis of for ADL when I was working with them to kind of give you an encapsulation of what the queen energy is.
Oh yeah.
And it's from the early part of Game of Thrones, and it's where Catelyn Stark goes into an inn and gets the men in the inn to arrest Tyrion. And she does it brilliantly because she walks in and she goes, you're related to this person who's related to this person who has a debt to me. And you're related to this person who's related to this person who has a debt to me. And you're related to this person who has... And she ties them all to her. She makes this case that like everybody in that room owes their fealty to her. And then she says, and that man killed my son. Now, she was wrong. but it's a brilliant example of like, that's the power of the queen. It's not do what I say because I'm the biggest and the strongest in the room.
No.
It's do what I say because of the relationships and the interrelationships that are present.
And then that's why I love the Bannerina as a thing, because it's not saying you don't do that as a ruler, but it's saying first and foremost, I'm a ruler and it doesn't matter what my sex is.
Yeah.
Woman king, male man king. It's a king. That's
king,
the fucking
king is a king
deal.
is a king. Yeah. Absolutely. And I also think it's really interesting when you kind of look at, and I'm sure I've said this before, when you think of these words and you degender these words and you kind of go, okay, there are warriors and there are kings and there are druids. And in Irish mythology, some of those warriors are women, some of those druids are women, some of those kings are women.
Sure.
And it's just kind of, we need to say it these days because we have grown used to a society and a context where those roles are very much occupied by men, particularly when we think of antiquity.
Yeah. We
just kind of don't think of women as being in those roles. Like the thing of how we used to think of doctor as being like a male job.
Sure.
Whereas I think that's much more broken down now, Anyway.
Let's go back to the story. So, but again, Clothru fascinates me because she has this whole other world link. She spent so much time over in the other world, kind of just stepped in the veil there for a while and came back. And you explicitly said she came back not mad, which alerts me to go, she was fucking mental. She was definitely mental.
Well, this is definitely, there's a kind of, I think Terry Pratchett said it, where he has this description in one of his books. There's a certain kind of insanity that isn't insanity. It's where you go through sanity and out the other side. And that's my kind of.
She kind of saw too much. She was in the room and she could see the fae in the corner, and she could see the magic kind of leaking out of the tap. You're like, she's a different kind of crazy, and like. Yeah, she just. I mean, I have never been able to find much of a story about Clothru, so a lot of the way that I kind of talk about her in stories is kind of my interpretation of her, which I always feel like I need to be kind of clear on that because lest people think of me as some kind of authority. Danger. I mean, we're constantly learning. Like, geez, I'm having a great time with. I'll put a couple of photos up up on the old Instagram now after this of the books we're reading at the moment. I've got a couple of great presents.
Yes.
And I'm constantly learning, and it's great to have this as a device to be able to put out what we're able to put out.
Totally.
And like when you find nuggets like our characters like Clothru that doesn't quite make sense, then that gives it open to the level of creativity that we enjoy in Candlelittales, where we kind of explore what that type of person would be, how it makes sense then from kind of from an author point of view.
And I think that's a really important thing, and I think that's something that you kind of brought a lot of as well from your background in acting and kind of dramaturgy of like, because it's easy and to me somewhat cheap storytelling to kind of go like, this person did the things that they did because they're a bad guy. Whereas if you actually try and take a character and go, okay, we know what she did. What kind of person does it make perfect sense for them to do that? How, if I get myself into that person's head, how do I make that course of action make sense to me?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing where you're like, all right, she wanted to be the mother of kings.
Everything else doesn't matter.
Nothing else fucking mattered.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter. Her sister was married to an abusive man. He was a fucking king. And he was going to father kings. And they were going to be great kings. And like that kind of one track mind. It didn't matter that this was her brother. It didn't matter that this was her son. Like to have that kind of terrifying singular focus. That's the way the Clothru makes sense to me.
Sure. I mean, like it's again, she definitely, I kind of just have her as a bit of a twinkle of madness in the eye, but at the same time, before the whole incest with the brother happens, or the brothers, she tries to convince them not to rise up against their and her father, who's the High King of Ireland, and go, don't do this big bad thing. Which is where
where my read on her is like, she's not the giggling and dribbling in the corner kind of crazy, because she's very, very clear-eyed on certain things.
Yeah.
And like, she's very clear-eyed, and like, you rising up in rebellion is a bad idea. And by the way, this is another episode of Cahor MacNessa being a fucking snake.
Oh, massively,
because he talks these triplets into rebelling against their father, the High King, and then he joins the battle on the side of the High King.
What is that about?
Fucks them over.
Completely fucked.
That was about fucking them over.
That was
about fucking over the High King, because poor Ucky Fidalach never recovered from fighting his sons. Yeah. Like it was it was a political move, and it was a piece of political and strategic genius that requires you to be.
I'm just imagining the Die Hard scene where the fucking guys go across there, they drop the weapons and they cross, and they everyone's like rah, and then the Scots get sent, or the Irish get sent in to fight.
You mean Braveheart?
What did I say?
Braveheart. You said Die Hard. I was
Braveheart.
Like, what fucking bit of Die Hard?
Meant Braveheart, alright. I was in the films, alright. Could see it.
You sure were. You could see it. They were all yelling. They were wearing kilts. It was a whole big thing.
Fucking.
And I was like, Nakatomi. What?
No, wrong.
So we talked a little bit about Clothru.
Okay. She goes to the other world, comes back, is a bit mental. She sleeps with her brothers.
Killed. Is the main point that I was going to get to.
Right.
And this is the inciting incident for the way that Maeve is killed.
Yes.
Which is Maeve is killed by her nephew Ferbida.
So, Ferbida grows. I think these are two really interesting points. Now that we get down to which fingers will we pick? These two.
I don't know what number we're on of our list.
Well, it's fine. But one of the topics is how Maeve thinks she can get away from the things in her past by going off to an island and retiring and forgetting about all the things and all the people that she had a hand in destroying in lives that she blah blah and decides to go off, and you can never get away from that. And the other one is this motivation that Ferbida has that drives him on incessantly, endlessly, only focused on avenging his mother.
He's his mother's son in some ways.
So you have this kind of like...
He's also a boy raised in Ulster.
And the Ulster people do not like telling good stories about Maeve.
Well, this is... So let's just talk about Maeve for a minute.
Okay.
Because I think Maeve is one of the reasons that I find Maeve absolutely wonderful and fascinating and brilliant as a character is most of the time if you read a version of the Tone. Maeve is the bitch queen from the West who's just does everything because she's fucking evil. And why does she do all of these things? Because fuck you, that's why. And she's completely one note, and she's completely painted as bad. And part of the reason why she's painted as bad is because she is trying to occupy a male position of power. She's trying to lead warriors as a woman. And that's one of the things, and I think this is, like, there are so many things in Irish, there's so many layers to Irish mythology of, like, different people retelling the stories with different agendas. And, like, I remember us telling the story in Galway once, where one of the first times we were in Galway Theatre Festival, where we mentioned the fact that Maeve needs 7 men to satisfy her in a day. And there was a woman from Germany in the audience, and she just sat up and beamed.
Yeah.
And, like, never heard a promiscuous woman described, like, where the promiscuity is her strength and not her weakness.
Yeah.
Because that is, in our culture, reserved exclusively for men. If you're a woman and you sleep with a lot of people, you're a fucking slut. If you're a man and you sleep with a lot of people, you're a hero. And Maeve completely breaks that down.
Yeah.
And, like, there's something but I'm not interested, and I said this to you the other night, I'm not interested in, so I'm interested in somewhat redeeming Maeve, because I am interested in her as a complex character.
And she's a complex character.
But I'm not interested in redeeming her to be a good guy.
But again, like,
because I'm not interested in that division.
But there is no, again, good and bad are very pointless. Even our father, whose office we're sitting in right now, hilarious, because, you know, he's a psychotherapist, and when he comes up nuggets every now and again, and he says one of the things he said to me was, there's no such thing as a good or a bad choice. There's no such thing as good things or bad things that you do. There are only those things that you will be able to live with yourself after you do them. So you have a consequence that you know will happen after you do it. And if you can live with that and you're okay with it and it suits your morals and your standing, then go ahead and do it. But if you will be racked by guilt and remorse, and this will upset your balance of life and your mental state, then don't fucking do it.
Then don't do it. Yeah, absolutely. And, like, that's where I think, you know, and I think that's very in line with the way that Irish mythology works as well. Like, we've often talked about this. There's no real good guys and bad guys.
There's just a grey mess in between, and
well,
obviously
they're all people, and they're larger than life people, and their actions are bigger and their consequences are bigger than most of us who live our normal size lives.
Because they're kings and woman kings, and have lots of people.
I like Maeve. I really like the character of Maeve as an anti-hero. I do not think she is a good hero. I think she is a fucking brilliant anti-hero.
So explain to me what exactly an anti-hero is.
Like, we see this, and this is the hero, or the person that you are rooting for in the story, who is not good, who is not wholly good, but who has enough in them that is sympathetic and likable. And there's also something about the anti-hero where they do the things that we sometimes wish that we could get away with doing ourselves. Like, if you think about one of the great anti-heroes of recent times is Walter White in Breaking Bad. And a huge number of people fucking loved him. Not because he's good, but because he does the shit and says the shit that we kind of wish we could get away with.
Right.
And I think that's where Maeve is really, really strong as a character. I think she's a brilliant anti-hero because she is, like, she's powerful, she's beautiful, she gives no shits about whether you like her or not.
Very little fucks given in that direction, yeah.
And yet she is a balancer of this world and the other world. There are stories of, like, the incursions from Cruachan into Connaught.
Yeah.
And, like, the way that she manages and mitigates and deals with these forces is incredible.
I'm sure
she's
goes
a taker
to
in.
Nat to, like, call those monsters
calls
up. And, like,
the monsters
creatures
forth.
Fucking,
Like, she has them. She has negotiated with them to the point that they actually listen to her and respond to her. And, like, she is a taker in of refugees, to the extent that, like, that there is a historical Queen Maeve of Connaught who took in the refugees of the Iceni, who were the tribe that rebelled against the Romans in Britain. The Boudicca, the great Celtic warrior king of Britain.
Cool.
Maeve took in her daughters.
Oh.
Maeve took in the refugees of that tribe. And like, Maeve took in the Ulster exiles in the myth when they are kicked out of house and home. And like, she's got this wonderful way, it happens in the Champions portion as well, where the lads are sent down to Croagh, where she's like, okay, first open the gate and have a feast. And then after 3 days of feasting, then we ask somebody, so what brought you here? I just think that's like, we'll come back to that another time, but I think that's a, like, that again is such a power move of like your worst enemy turns up at your doorstep.
But she is really fascinating in that not only is she she's the go-to place for Fergus McRoy to go to when he has the fight.
She seems to be the go-to for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. Like she's even the go-to for Crahor to settle that dispute that comes up that we will be talking about later in January.
Yeah. And it's
much
she's
as
so
he kind of fucking hates it.
Heavily tied in with the Ulster cycle. They share a border, but there's something more than that too. You know, like I'm reading a book that's trying to bring back some level of mythology to the Connaught in Cashel and the Munster stories that were kind of forgotten. And you have the Hilatara in Leinster, and you have, well, it's Leinster now, is Meath, but like you have like areas that are quite kind of mythic in Leinster, but Ulster and Connaught have the Ulster cycle that they constantly battle on, and it's always Connaught and Ulster.
They're the great enemies because at that time they were the two main tribes. The Ullid and the people of Connaught were the two most established centres of kind of civilization in some ways.
Right.
But yeah,
and again, like I find it
not the only ones. And again, it is one of the funny things about the regionality of Irish mythology.
I was just about to say,
that like you might read a book about the Taun in which Maeve is the bad guy and Cahor MacNess is the good guy, and that's often how it's told. And you might read a book where the Fomorians are the bad guys and the Tuatha Dé Danann are the good guys. But if you go to Donegal, Balor of the Evil Eye is not a baddie. He's a trickster rogue and he's a fucking king and he's fantastic.
Yeah.
And the theatre there is named after him. The Balor National Theatre is in Donegal. And if you go to Connaught, Queen Maeve is not a villain. Yeah,
she's a cairn in Sligo, and like, you know, Sligo's so steeped in myths and Yeats stories.
Totally steeped in myth. And like, so you already in Ireland, because these figures are so rooted in their places, the people of those places will ally themselves with the characters that are from their place.
Yeah.
And you're not gonna get away with vilifying Maeve and Sligo.
No.
Like, so I think it's great because it really breaks down that whole dichotomy of good versus evil that I think is so, like, I hate it. I hate it in myths. I don't like it. I think it's oversimplifying. It's always an oversimplification. And so I really like the more that we can kind of break it down and get to the interesting part of these characters, the better, I think.
What's interesting for me is very simple. I'm trying to run away from my past. I'm trying to ignore all the shit I did. Whether she killed Clothru or not, she had enough blood in her hands to be killed by fucking somebody. Like the fact that she amasses, like we'll be telling next week, the death of Cuchulainn, and she's the one who spearheads that one.
Yeah.
And she has a vendetta against Cuchulainn.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that she gets vilified, I think, is because the great hero Cuchulainn, who as Irish people we all want to associate with, we want to have his t-shirt, we all want to, like, you know, have that as the hero.
Oh well, he's the golden boy.
Sure.
And she's his antagonist.
And therefore you want to like pick Cuchulainn's side, not Maeve.
Yeah.
And but like it's not, again, it's an simplification to do that. And so what happens in that story, she amasses an army to go against him and brings about his death. But she thinks she can run away from
him. That's also another story of like the reason she's able to amass an army to go against him is because nobody in Ireland is left who doesn't have a blood debt against Cuchulainn.
Yeah.
Like, but you're right. Like she does that. She brings all of his chickens home to roost on top of him, and then sometime later she retires and she goes to live out her life in peace. And like this is after Fergus McRoy has died. This is after Oliel McMurtough has died, which we'll also hear about in the death of Conall Carnock, because that's how Oliel McMurtough died.
Great story though.
And like all of these big relationships in her life have come to an end. You know, I'm not sure in the timeline whether she outlives Cahor MacNessa or not. But if she doesn't outlive Cahor MacNessa, he is at that point, you know, that we heard of a couple of weeks ago, where he's living his half life. So he's either half dead or wholly dead.
Yeah.
Cuchulainn is dead. Like, her great battles have been fought, her great victories have been won, all of her kind of great and terrible deeds are behind her. And she goes to this island on this lake. And I mean, living on an island on a lake, it's a well-defended position. So I do not think that she thinks that she's going to be immune from somebody coming after her. And I think that's why she picks that place. I think it is a defendable location. And like, there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of Irish building that was done on kind of crannogs in the middle of lakes for that reason, because it was defensible. But Firbuide finds her. And my fascination with the way the Firbuide story was told, and I did kind of lean on this in my telling, was that the first reason that she catches his eye is because she's still really beautiful. And her nephew, by this doubly incestuous woman, Clothru, his first reaction to seeing Maeve is, who's that? And then he's told that it's Maeve. And then he goes, oh, right, the woman who killed my mother, I better do something about this. But he sets himself that task. He sets himself that task of, he measures the distance to her bathing spot. He measures the height of Maeve. And he trains for a year to be able to make the shot. Because, like, he makes himself into a sniper. Like, he basically kind of invents being a sniper in order to kill his aunt. Yeah. Because I think the other thing is, like, don't forget, she's still fucking dangerous. Yeah. Like, I think there's a reason he kills her by a sniper shot. I don't think, like, in a culture that values single combat, that values, you know, he doesn't roll up to her. Like, she's a warrior. She is repeatedly depicted as warrior.
It's very unusual.
She kills people in single combat.
But it's very unusual, and we'll be talking about, like, the moral and the moral ambiguity with you know, the death of Conall Cearnach, which is a load of that tied into it, you know.
So much.
But, like, it's this, like, hang on a second, you killed my mother, so therefore you should be allowed a chance at retribution, and the challenge will be accepted. But he clearly doesn't want or isn't honourable enough himself to go about
and
it that way.
Like, there's multiple ways that you could read that. Now, you could read it as, like, he's a male warrior, and that the Ulster tribe seem much more into their gender roles than the Connaught tribe. So, like, you could read it as a man doesn't want to fight a woman, and that there wouldn't be honour in a single combat if you were fighting a female warrior. You could absolutely read it
that would make a lot of sense.
You could read it that she's too fucking dangerous still. She's too scary, and he doesn't think that he can take her one-on-one.
Makes sense.
Which also makes perfect sense to me. Like, there's multiple ways that you kind of look at that, and ways to make sense of his motivation. I didn't give it. I didn't come down on one side or the other particularly strongly, because I think that's more interesting when it's left open to
definitely is
interpretation.
I love the idea of, like, right, this is going to catch her off guard, and I'm going to kill her from far away, and she won't have a chance to defend herself.
You could also read it as a mercy kill. That just popped into my head as you were talking, because it's like bolt from the blue right into the fucking side of the head, and she's dead before she even realizes that she's been hit. Like, it's a headshot. Like, that's a fucking.
Now, question: he doesn't have a stone next to him after waiting for this is where I find a couple of holes in this. I'm like, hang on, he's waited for a year. He doesn't just have a few stones choice picked out in his pocket. He sees her, and he reaches for a block of cheese. How hard is the cheese, like?
Well,
this makes no.
This is another one of the bits that doesn't make sense, because this is I kind of.
Is he just gnawing at it, or fucking better throw the cheese at her?
Well, this is another thing that is like, I did read it that it was suggested in by a few different people that this is another way of denigrating Maeve. Oh. That this was a way of, like, depriving her of a glorious death.
There you go.
That she was killed by fucking cheese, and so it's kind of comical and it's kind of silly. and that this was a way of because there have been so many stories and ways of tellings and ways of leaving certain things out of Maeve's story in order to denigrate her and make her weaker and make her seem more worse and shittier. And so it was kind of like maybe this was a way of giving her a shitty death, that she was killed with a fucking rind of cheese. The other thing that I think might be going on is that there might be a connotation to cheese that we don't have anymore, because I think that's one of the things that can sometimes happen, and it's a little bit like these are very old stories. I'm not scholar enough. I'm not fucking good enough to know which is the oldest version, and like there's also so many texts missing from the record, and there's so many stories that were never written down. So I mean, I'm kind of curious about, like, I wonder, is there a meaning that we once had to cheese that we don't have anymore? Like maybe this is symbolic, but it's really interesting. Like when you're looking at stories from a different culture or from an older culture that has, the culture here has been broken several times and in several places, so there's no direct line of continuity back to when these stories were composed for various reasons. And like maybe there was a meaning to this. Maybe there was some kind of portentous meaning to this particular type of hard cheese that we just don't fucking know about anymore.
Not pretentious.
Portentous, I said.
I know, that's why I'm just laughing.
All right. No, it's not pretentious. It's portentous. Portentous cheese. Pretentious cheese is a different thing.
Because I have a lot of pretentious ideas about cheese,
I mean, I've eaten a lot of pretentious cheese over the last couple of weeks.
That's
because
a lot of cheese in general.
Because cheese boards are a thing, and they're amazing.
With fucking fruit in it. Some smelly, some not so smelly.
Yeah, they're super pretentious.
They're very pretentious.
I don't think they kill you no matter how hard. Mind you, do you know what? It happens a lot in Irish mythology, because I'm now thinking of the sons of Tyrone throwing an apple at somebody's head and it goes through his head and out the other side.
But an apple.
And Cuchulainn does that as well. It's like apples are not harder than skulls, no matter how hard you throw it. Cheese is not harder than your skull.
I mean, like the apple thing makes sense. Like, you get a fucking good apple, like fucking belted.
It would hurt you
if you threw it.
If you threw it hard enough for the apple to actually fully smush, it would fully smush off your head.
If you got in temple, like, fuck, I'd say no.
Can somebody who does science please, like, Mythbusters this and, like,
I reckon you could
get a material that's as hard as a skull and hit an apple off it and see which breaks first.
Shoot out a bazooka at it.
It doesn't matter how hard you hit it.
I mean, it would.
If it's not, no, it wouldn't go through and out the other side.
I mean, that part, yeah, sure.
Being killed by it.
Being the killed by it part.
Well, I'm less sure of that, because I think if you hit somebody in the eye with an apple and it was a small enough, hard enough apple and it was going hard enough, you would probably do some serious damage.
Exactly. Right.
I'm saying
right.
Apples are not harder than skulls. You heard it here, folks. You heard it here first. I'm going on the record here. Apples are not harder than the skull.
And cheese is a lot softer again.
And cheese is, well, there's some pretty hard cheeses, but again, cheese is not harder than the skull.
True.
Do you know what? If it was harder than the skull, it was definitely fucking way inedible for Fergus.
It kind of leads to that. For fuck's sake, Fergus, like, what are you doing? Like, why would you not have stones in your pocket? You complete fuck and eat it.
Well, this is what I mean. Like, there's no logical reason for it. There has to be another reason for it. And either cheese meant something different to our ancestors, or somebody was trying to make Maeve look like a fucking asshole.
Or, and hear me out, right? Or I've got another idea. Or there's a way of elevating a form of status for the killer, for the thrower of the apple through the brain. He's like, not only did I kill him, I killed him with an apple and knocked his brain out.
Yeah.
And so Fergus managed to not only kill her, but kill her with cheese.
Yeah.
You know, like maybe it's actually more
maybe
impressive.
It's more about bigging him up, because that's, I mean, the people who kill people with apples are like Cuchulainn and one of the sons of Tyrone, and it is a little bit about bigging them up and making them cool.
So maybe.
But then also there's not that much about Fergus.
I mean, Fergus was just doomed from the start, really. Like,
yeah,
he didn't have
just a weird guy with bull horns who kind of weirdly fancied his aunt and then murdered her.
I happy note to end on, I'd
Yeah.
say.
Poor Furbridge.
Listen.
Never had a chance.
Never had a chance.
Although it was probably better for him that his mother was killed on the day he was born, because that's who his mother was. And
yeah, he was.
Yeah,
Things were gonna get icky.
It wasn't going to be good anyway.
No,
not with Clothru as his mom.
No. So, we are still in Cork. We are recording these and leaving them out on a timely matter, because mainly we wanted to free up our time to be doing the storytelling course on weekends starting the 9th of January, which is going to be exciting. We are excited to be doing that and continuing the Death series, which has 2 more stories.
2 more stories in the Death series.
The third last one.
And then we
Hang
are...
on a second. I just want to mention something about the Death series. It might seem untimely to be doing stories about death at this time, which is hilarious, because the first... I don't think I mentioned this on Paul's Show chat before, but because the last time we went into lockdown early in March, the death of Cuchulainn was lined up, and it was ready to go, and we were like, fuck no, we can't release the death of Cuchulainn. Like,
we're going back into lockdown in Ireland now for the month of January. And we're finishing off our Death series.
About random time, and we try and line these things up with, like, you know, a month or 6 weeks in advance.
Well, I think with the Death series,
another lockdown and another Cuchulainn story.
The Death of Cuchulainn is right back on schedule at the start of the lockdown.
And God, I had to record it about 5 times as well.
Yeah, you had trouble with that one.
Oh my God. So many issues.
But you know what? It's concluding with a nice, snappy little story about the death of Connaught, who's deadly and hilarious.
Yeah.
So,
and from death, life leads on, all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
It's all about
death is not to be feared. And do you know what? I think that was kind of where we got to with the whole Death series, and why we decided to put it out when we did in December, because it was kind of like, look, we're not at the end of this whole situation. We're not going to be at the end of this whole situation for a good while, so we can't keep pretending that death doesn't exist on a podcast, because it super does, and so many of our stories are about it. And you know, I think that there's something lovely about the death stories, because the opinion of our ancestors was that as long as somebody was talking about you, you were effectively still alive. And I really like that idea, because I think that's wonderful. Because, you know, our grandparents are still alive, all of them. Not just the one who's still clinging on, but like every single one of them is still alive, because we still talk about them.
Honestly, I thought we were going to follow up last week. We talked about how brilliant it was that we have a little nephew in the world coming in. We put in Guatemala, has a newborn kid, and I thought we'd be talking about this weekend about the passing of our grandmother, and she managed to put herself back.
She's decided to stay for another bit.
She's 99. She's soon to be 100. If she lasts her 100th, I don't know. Like, I don't know.
She's extraordinary.
She has been knocking on
She has been knocking on heaven's door for about 4 years, and she's decided again to stick around. So fair play to her. I
guess.
But it's listen. It's not to be feared. It's not to be denied.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And I think that's why we kind of came back to it, even though this global pandemic is still working its way through all of us.
But it's that meditation on death. It's the, you know, see that your life is going to be coming to an end relatively soon in the great scheme of things, and not to be afraid of that, but to embrace it and make the best of the time that we have while we have it, which is kind of the whole point. And tell fucking great stories when you have a chance.
Absolutely.
Isn't that the whole point?
Thanks very much for listening to us shite on for a while, and thanks very much for joining us. And if you're watching this on YouTube, that's for you.
She just winked at the camera really weirdly.
I did finger guns. It was awesome. You didn't see it because you're not on YouTube. So if you would like to see it on YouTube, you can go over and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find us on Patreon.
To see what in the name of God my hair is doing right now.
It looks fine. Yeah, it's good.
Looks mental.
I mean, everyone's hair looks mental. It's a lockdown. You can see my fluffy bunny slippers on YouTube. My YouTube Crocs. Exclusive. Aaron's gross Crocs.
Hey,
thank you.
These are my Guru Crocs. Guru gave me my Crocs.
Yeah.
These are Guru Crocs.
Aaron's Guru gave me his Crocs. And they're very comfortable, and he loves them very, very much.
I do. And do go check out McTowell's Pig on our YouTube page as well, because that was the story that we kind of didn't really big up all that much, but it's released. It's on YouTube.
It all happened very quickly, but we recorded it thanks to the folks at the Dunleary Lexicon, and it's up on YouTube, and it's a live performance. Well, I mean, it's live in the sense that we didn't really do many cuts, and the musicians were there with us when we were telling the story, which is like delightfully unusual these days.
Yeah,
So.
it is actually. It was a little bit of get together, it was nice.
It was great.
And hopefully 2021 will have more live gigs. We'll be able to get out there and do a thing towards the end of the year probably.
We'll be doing some fun stuff. But anyway, listen, keep in touch with us and let us know if you have any questions or comments or stuff. We're not going to be doing the live streams in January, but I'd love it if anybody had any questions or observations on the podcast as they come out. Send them in to us, because we might be able to still kind of include your comments.
We do get the odd question or comment here and there, and they're great. Thank you very much for tuning in, for listening in. Keep healthy, keep safe, keep sound, and yeah, that's all from us. Grow more. You.